Welcome to Chapter 7 of PSYC 379. This chapter is looking at motivation and behavior. So there's a couple of key definitions that we're going to go over throughout the course of this chapter. The first is motivation, and this is a condition, usually an internal one, that initiates, activates, or maintains the individual's goal-directed behavior. The nature of human motivation is a subject of discussions and continuous attempts to find a universal theory that would explain it. And this is done through evolutionary theories, in sociology, in psychology, as well as a number of other disciplines. The book presents a model to illustrate how different factors can affect our motivation. And biological and environmental experiences play important roles, and these are both impacted by cultural factors. Culture is learned with practice, and it's a really long process to learn culture. A constant across cultures, though, is human development and humans' urges to become competent, productive adults. However, what's different across culture is the meaning of what is competent and what's productive, and how we actually go about attaining this goal. And socialization occurs over a very long period of time. It starts early and ends when we've mastered social norms in our cultures. And it's a process of learning and internalizing the rules and patterns of a society. Enculturation is a closely related concept. Oftentimes people use them interchangeably, but the main difference is that socialization means the process and mechanisms by which we learn rules, whereas enculturation refers to the products of socialization. So the subjective aspects, psychological, for example, the parts that are adopted. So for example, women learn how females should act in a culture, and this is through socialization, and then when she adopts these ideas and enacts them, this would be enculturation. And there's lots of agents of these processes. These can be people, institution, organizations, all of these different places that people are getting messages about who one is, how one should act, and then increasing or decreasing the likelihood that people are going to remain consistent with those ideas. And society is a system of relationships that exists, where culture refers to the shared meaning within those systems. So that's a brief overview of the difference between enculturation and socialization. On this slide, there's the ecological systems theory, and there's two pictures that are essentially depicting the same thing, but it's just in slightly different ways, depending on if one of the pictures appeals to you more or makes more sense to you than the other. But this is a framework for understanding how we're socialized and the social forces that create the experiences that then impact our motivation. The ecological systems theory was developed by Uri Bronfenbrenner, who's a developmental psychologist, and he was looking at how development is essentially how people change over time in different ways, biologically, cognitively, emotionally, socially. And in his view, we're all affected by many systems, the levels of context. And he argues that we have to consider a child or a person in these contexts to understand the person, and that the relationship goes both ways. It's reciprocal. The child affects these different social levels as much as they affect him or her. So in all of these contexts, people, institutions, and so forth are teaching people that are existing within these systems about their culture. The book emphasizes a couple of different theories about motivation behavior: evolutionary, social, drive and arousal theories. A couple of different psychological frameworks like psychoanalysis and humanistic psychology are elaborated upon, as well as learning theories. So at this point, we're going to start talking a little bit about evolutionary theories. I'm not going to read all of the points on this slide since they're outlined, but I would suggest looking them over and reviewing them, and these are also found in the book. But I will add that the origin of human motivation is biological from an evolutionary perspective. So due to genetic variation, some organisms are more likely to survive than others. Those who survive pass on their advantageous genes to their offspring. And over many generations, genetic patterns that promote survival become dominant. For instance, hunters become successful seekers and killers of animals, while gatherers become excellent finders of berries, roots, and fruits. The struggle for survival within the human species motivates people to compete for scarce resources. And individuals who are skillful competitors and who are fit for the struggle are going to succeed and prosper. Whereas in this theory, the unfit, or those who lack the motivation to compete, are going to fail. According to evolutionary theorist Geoffrey Miller, the brain, like the peacock's tail, is designed through evolution to attract the opposite sex. And male and female sexes have a reason to show off in an attempt to attract a mate, but men and women have different criteria for making their choices. And the difference between men and women, according to Miller, is that women naturally tend to act altruistically to show that they can share resources, and men tend to act greedy to demonstrate that they can protect the resources. Now, in contrast to evolutionary theories, the sociological approach emphasizes the crucial role of social factors in determining motivation. The concepts of drive and arousal are explored in a number of different theories. I'm going to highlight the way that the book is presenting things and then just make a couple of connections down the road when we're talking about some of the psychological theories. But this slide is looking in particular on the two mechanisms of motivation, drive and arousal. Arousal theories of motivation suggest that people seek to maintain optimal levels of arousal by actively challenging their exposure to arousing stimuli. An internally aroused condition that directs an organism to satisfy some psychological need is called a drive. And one of the central concepts of motivational theories is need, a motivated state caused by a physiological or psychological deprivation, such as lack of food or water. And according to drive theories, people across countries come to value what they do not have, just as those who are hungry are especially likely to value food. These next couple of slides are going to describe how different psychological frameworks make sense of these drives and motivation and behavior. And this slide in particular is looking at psychodynamic approaches. The book is also talking about psychoanalysis, which is the framework that Freud originally came up with, and psychodynamic is the more modern interpretation of a lot of Freud's theories. So I might be using those terms somewhat interchangeably, but they're actually quite different, and if you're interested in psychology and you're interested in these differences, you're more than welcome to email me and I can provide you with additional resources. Okay, so the central concept of the psychodynamic theories originally developed by Sigmund Freud is the unconscious. And the unconscious is the level of consciousness that contains thoughts, feelings, and memories that influence us without our awareness, and that we cannot become aware of at will. In contrast, the conscious is the part of the mind that an individual has full access to. And the idea that psychic reality, fantasy, and internal life can impact individuals' perceptions of what's real is a significant concept that's endured through a series of psychological revision. And it's also the basis for Freud's topographical theory, which posits that the mind is divided into three parts. Closest to awareness is the conscious, and then there's the preconscious, which is separated by the repression barrier from the unconscious. He also suggests that there are a number of different internal forces that influence decision-making, namely the id, the ego, and the superego. And surrounded by the id and the superego is the ego, a level of the personality that adapts to external reality by making compromises between the id, the superego, and the environment. Now the next kind of key term that I put on this slide is anxiety, because anxiety is really important in and alerting individuals to stressors. And anxiety is managed by implementing a range of defense mechanisms like repression, denial, projection, and sublimation. Individuals may or may not be aware of using these defenses, though, and when these defenses are insufficient to ward off the anxiety, that's when Freud hypothesizes that pathology results. Okay, so those are the key points that I wanted to make on this. I'm actually not going to elaborate on the specifics of various defense mechanisms at this point, but again, if there are any concepts that come up in these PowerPoints that you're interested in finding out more about, feel free to email me and I'll see what additional resources I can find. So because this course is asking you to critically analyze things and especially be critical thinkers in consuming of the research that's out there, I wanted to throw out these two additional terms that I think are tied in fairly closely to the idea of conscious and unconscious, and that is implicit versus explicit attitudes. And explicit attitudes are assessed through self-report, so this is what people are saying that they believe. But it's susceptible to social desirability concerns and the desire to have positive impression management. So when you're asking somebody a question, they're going to be limited to a certain extent by social desirability, especially depending on the topic, if it's a socially sensitive topic. But they're also going to be limited by what they're aware of as well as what they're willing to report to you. So while self-report does allow you to get an understanding of what people say that they believe, it might not be the best way of assessing information about socially sensitive topics, especially when you're working cross-culturally. So another way of assessing attitudes is implicitly. And this is done through looking at association, so the strength and direction of an association. The most common way that this is measured is with the implicit association test, or the IAT, but it's not measuring the endorsement of beliefs. It really is just looking at how easily people are making associations between different groups. There's a lot more information out there on the difference between implicit and explicit attitudes, but it's something to think about when you're looking at cross-cultural research, or really any type of research. Is the measurement tool going to be the best way of actually assessing the information that the researchers, and then you by reading that article, are interested in finding out about? So in this slide, we're going to start talking about some humanistic theories. And these theories focus on human dignity, individual choice, and self-worth. And the book emphasizes Abraham Maslow, and that's what several of these slides are going to be on. He was a pioneer of humanistic psychology who proposed that humans have a number of innate needs that are arranged in a hierarchy in terms of their potency. And Maslow grouped these needs into 5 categorical levels: physiological, safety, love, esteem, and self-actualization. So here's the table of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the idea is that once an individual has satisfied the cluster of needs at a particular level, they're able to progress to the next hierarchical level. So for example, people are typically not prompted to seek acceptance and esteem until they have their needs met for food, water, and shelter. This is also kind of a core fundamental component of crisis management, where if you are interested in doing kind of natural disaster relief intervention or part of those types of crisis intervention teams, one of the first things that people need to address are these immediate physiological and safety needs before they're able to kind of process and unpack maybe any kind of traumatic response that they have, or just how they make sense of whatever put themselves in that situation in the first place. According to Maslow, self-actualizing person should be able to exhibit a number of similar characteristics. These include things like, I'm just going to highlight some of what's listed on this page: autonomy and independence, democratic leadership traits, a resistance to enculturation, strong ethical awareness, and a problem-centered rather than self-centered orientation. And I want you to take a second to think about which of these features do you think are likely to be universal and which are culture specific, and this would be from your point of view. And think about why you think that some of these might play a different role or be valued differently in different cultures, if any of them. Or if you think some of these really do have a fairly strong universal component to them. So this last slide on humanistic theories is talking about just some main points of the theories as a whole, and while not limited to Abraham Maslow's work, these are general themes that are often found amongst a variety of different humanistic theories. So the fact that human beings should be viewed from a holistic perspective, that human beings are aware of their existence, that they live uniquely human in a uniquely human context that's not limited to their immediate surroundings, that rational and knowledgeable individuals are capable of exercising choices, and that if human behavior is generally intentional, deliberate, and goal-directed, then human beings are usually aware that their actions can cause certain outcomes. And although the structure of needs presented by Maslow may be appropriate for individuals of all cultures, the relative strengths of the needs are certainly more culture-specific. And self-preoccupation can be seen as a Western characteristic that's not so dominant in other cultures. The Chinese hierarchy of values, for instance, includes the promotion of interconnectedness in contrast to the emphasis on self-development that is highlighted in Maslow's version of the hierarchy of needs. So yet another framework to understand motivation and behavior are through learning theories. And learning theories are associated primarily with the behaviorist tradition in psychology and maintain that people are aware of their thought patterns and therefore are able to control their motivation and behavior because they control the conditions in which these behaviors actually occur. So people learn what they want and they learn how to achieve rewards, mastery, and affiliation. And psychologists working within this tradition hope to establish some universal scientific principles that explain behavior. Environment, educational conditions, cultural norms, all of these are factors that condition people's responses to a stimuli and help them adjust to the environment and therefore direct their actions. And behaviorism appeared as a set of universal principles that have been found to be applicable in a number of cultural settings. Now there's also two categories of motivations as laid out with learning theories, and this is intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, where intrinsic motivation engages people in various activities for no apparent reward except the pleasure and satisfaction of the activity itself. And people may engage in such behaviors for a variety of reasons: to obtain cognitive stimulation and gain a sense of accomplishment, competency, and also mastery over their environment. Now, in contrast, extrinsic motivation comes from the external environment. So examples of extrinsic reward include praise, high grades, or money for a particular behavior. And such rewards can strengthen existing behavior as well as provide people with information about their performance and increase their feelings of self-worth. Both of these types of motivation can be influenced by either external or internal factors, and this in turn can increase or decrease the likelihood that a person is going to make a particular judgment, plan, or behavior. Now this slide is looking at achievement motivation. And need for achievement is a social need that directs people to constantly strive for excellence and success, influence, and accomplishment. Activities not oriented towards these goals are not motivating and are usually performed without commitment. So any two individuals may develop different types of achievement motivation, low or high, and one strives for an excellence and success, the other is happy doing what is required and does not need recognition from others. So it would be something worth thinking about. Are there cultural differences in achievement motivation then? Are there high and low achievement-oriented nations and cultures as a whole? So the question, are we born with the motivation to achieve has been researched, and classical studies by, like those done by David McClellan in 1958, demonstrated that achievement motivation is learned in childhood, and it's acquired from parents who stress excellence and display affection and emotional rewards to their children for high levels of achievement. And these are going to increase the likelihood that this type of attitude and decisions continues. So during the individual's life, a wide range of social and psychological factors could further influence achievement motivation. There's also a large cross-national project that involved more than 12,000 participants by Furnham and colleagues in 1994, and this showed a strong relationship between individual achievement motivation and economic growth. And in particular, economic growth is correlated with attitudes towards competitiveness. The stronger these attitudes, the higher the achievement motivation, and the higher the achievement motivation, the greater the rate of economic growth. If this correlation does exist, what might be the causal direction of the association? Now, this book also provides a non-Western example of achievement motivation by defining and highlighting Confucian work dynamism. And they've described this, the book, describes it as a cultural syndrome manifested in persistence at achieving economic goals, social stability, encouragement of prudence and savings, and promoting loyalty and trust by emphasizing shame. And with this example, they say that China has most likely encouraged these types of values over the last 20 years, and empirical data suggests that individuals who grew up during a time of economic prosperity show an increasingly greater endorsement of values such as egalitarianism, harmony, and autonomy. And these studies also show that feelings of financial insecurity lead people to seek out strong leaders, absolute rules, and social order, while feelings of financial security drive people towards self-expression and individual gratification. So with that lead-in, I want to present these definitions on the last slide for achievement motivation of collectivist success motivation and individualist success motivation. So collectivist success motivation directs a person to connect with other people, and the individual's contribution is seen as beneficial to the members of a particular group or society in general. In contrast, an individualist success motivation affects one's attitudes and actions and is directed to the attainment of a personal goal. Freud, amongst other psychologists and social scientists, have emphasized the importance of both sex and aggression in motivation and behavior. So this slide is talking specifically about aggression motivation, which is the desire to harm or injure others, and physical abuse, verbal assault, anger retaliation, open hostility, and many other forms of aggressive behaviors are a part of our everyday life, no matter where we live. Aggressive motivation, though, has multiple roots and causes and cannot really be explained by any one particular theory. So cross-cultural psychologists compare and combine the existing data into a comprehensive view that takes into account just a wide range of psychological, political, biological, socioeconomic, and cultural factors that are linked to aggression, specifically with like aggressive motivation and behavior. This slide is looking at sexual motivation, which is oftentimes regulated, and at least in part, by human physiology. However, genes, hormones, and other biological factors only change the probability of the occurrence of certain types of sex behaviors. Societal factors include laws, customs, and norms, and in fact determine what types of sexual behaviors are considered acceptable, under what circumstances, and with what frequency. So on this last slide, we're looking at a table that is talked about from the book about different features of sexual expression and how it's regarded in traditional sex cultures and non-traditional sex cultures. So every culture, though, really what I want you to take away from this is that every culture has its own set of requirements, beliefs, symbols, and norms regarding sexuality and its expression. And this set of characteristics is called sex culture. And this can vary greatly across the world and is influenced by current religions, ideological, political, and moral values developed by society. So you can take a look at this. You might find that you agree or disagree with different components of this table, but it's something to think about. So this concludes Chapter 7, and I want you to remember to do all of the post-chapter assignments, and have a wonderful week.